By a show of hands, how many of you sitting in the audience this afternoon came into the truth after 1975?
You're listening to The Critical Thought, where we challenge our listeners to use critical thinking when examining the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Hi, I'm Lady C.
Hi, I'm JT.
And we're getting ready to talk about the Watchtower in 1975.
That's right. So, Lady C, what was your experience in your congregation when you were growing up about 1975?
Well, what I remember about 1975 is the fact that a lot of the people, kids in my congregation, were dropping out of high school so that they could sign up to regular Pioneer. Because the whole thing was full-time ministry was being pushed. And they were saying, well, since the end is so close, why not just quit school, regular Pioneer, and what better thing to be doing at that time? Now, why do I remember that so well? Because I, too, wanted to quit school. I wanted to do the same thing, right? And so, but when I presented that to my mom, she said, no way, we weren't doing that. So I couldn't quit school. But the other kids in my congregation, their parents were supporting them to do that. The brothers were not discouraging it. And, people were doing what they were doing, like today. People are pioneering still.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
They still got the pioneer spirit, right? So anyway, I remember that. And then the other thing I remembered was people getting baptized.
Oh, yeah, lots of folks got baptized.
Because my family was one of the families that got baptized because of the 1975 situation. And my mom, her younger siblings, and a lot of people that we knew, everybody was getting baptized. Mm-hmm. So it was a big buzz at that time.
Okay, that's for sure.
So, yeah. Well, how about you, JT? What was your experience like?
My experience was very interesting. In my congregation, the big thing was people were moving to serve where the need is great. So people were moving all the time to go serve in the congregation. And interestingly, we had 3 brothers who actually moved down from New York City to come down and serve down in the country, in the rural. They call it going to serve where the need was great. So that was my remembrance of people were making major changes in their lives because they believed the world was going to end in 1975.
Well, you know what? Let's talk about this 1975 and really get into the history of it so we can help our audience to really understand what it was that people lived through and why those individuals felt the way they did and did the things in their lives that they did.
Oh my goodness, 1975 and Jehovah's Witnesses. This is probably one of my favorite subjects. The reason why it's one of my favorite subjects is because it allows a person to get to see 2 very important aspects of Jehovah's Witnesses. One, what they often say the Bible means, how the Bible is to be understood. And secondly, the culture. These 2 aspects about Jehovah's Witnesses are, I believe, are 2 of the most important things any person who is examining Jehovah's Witnesses can come to appreciate. What they teach and what the culture. What culture is it that Jehovah's Witness children and adults live in, breathe in, grow in? 1975 is an example of just that thing. One of the things I tell people is that the Watchtower writers, Jehovah's Witnesses as a denomination, especially we're looking at their leadership. The Watchtower writers, they made a very foolish decision. And that is, they decided that they would try to prove that Jesus Christ was a liar. Now, some people watching this video might be saying to themselves, well, you mean the Watchtower, Jehovah's Witnesses tried to prove that Jesus was a liar? Well, let's set it into some context. Now notice what Jesus Christ himself said. Ladies, see, what did Jesus say for all of us to listen to?
Matthew 24:36, New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures. Concerning that day and hour, nobody knows, neither the angels of the heavens nor the Son, but only the Father.
Now, it's very important to note that scripture. It says, no man knows the day or the hour. And yet, this is a simple statement. Doesn't take Greek, doesn't take a knowledge of Hebrew to understand this. Did you notice what Jesus said? Jesus says, nobody knows. I don't even know. And yet the Watchtower writers, they decided, we're going to prove Jesus a liar. We're going to show people that we know when the world is going to end. Now, it's interesting how this takes place. They decide that they're going to do this by introducing something to people that they had never heard of before. There was something that people had never ever heard of. The average person that you were to interact with on the street has never heard of this. This is known as Bible chronology, where the Watchtower writers will take some figures, add them up, times half a time, 3 times a quarter of a time, and 4 carry the 1 over the 2, don't forget the 0. And they will come up with some figures. So the Watchtower set out to prove that Jesus was a liar. So after a while, they came up with this wonderful calculation that the world was going to end in 1914. That was what their Bible chronology taught them. Now, you have to understand that we're talking about 1910, 1911, when Jehovah's Witnesses was going around the world. People in Chile, people in Africa, people in Latin America, people all over the world, North Carolina, South Carolina, wherever you were at, wherever Jehovah's Witnesses were at, they were letting people know the world's going to end in 1914. Boom. Here's January 1st, 1915. Every single person who had ever talked to anyone who was offering the Watchtower magazine realized Jehovah's Witnesses could not prove Jesus to be a liar. Now, you would think, okay, we made a mistake. We're going to learn from it. Oh, no. Watchtower decided to do it again. They came up with a new date, 1918. So once again, 1915, 1916, 1917, leading up to 1918, they was walking around Watchtowers telling people the world is going to end in 1918. Now, there was a lot of folks who was like, y'all need to leave that alone. Y'all just need to leave it alone. Jesus said, no man know the day of the hour, leave it alone. Not Jehovah's Witnesses. Not the Watchtower writers. They was like, no, we're going to prove Jesus a liar. And sure enough, on January 1st, 1919, everybody who'd ever talked to one of Jehovah's Witnesses, ever talked to anybody who was offering a Watchtower, knew that they didn't know what they was talking about. Now, at this point, one would conclude that they don't got beat upside the head enough. They're not going to do this stuff no more. No. Didn't learn a lesson. As my grandmama used to say, they don't believe fat meat is greasy. So here we go again. They pick a new date by means of what? Bible chronology. Now, think about this. We're talking about somebody in Meridian, Mississippi. Jehovah's Witnesses knock on the door, clean cut and everything. And they're thinking, Bible chronology. I've never heard of that. Well, I'm going to show you that 1925, the world's going to end. God's going to destroy all the governments, all religions. The world's going to be a paradise. January 1st, 1926. Everybody know these people don't know what they're talking about. So with 3 strikeouts, you would conclude, the logical conclusion would be, this is an area we need to avoid. We need to stop going into the deep end of the pool since we can't swim. So the Watchtower has now joined a long list of individuals and groups who've tried to prove Jesus a liar. And every single one failed. No one has proved Jesus a liar. And he made a simple statement. No man know the day of the hour. I don't even know. Very simple statement. Now, it's interesting that you would conclude that Jehovah's Witnesses had learned their lesson by now. They done tried this multiple times. Oh no, can't stop now. Got to keep going. But now, this new date that they picked, it was very interesting how they did this, and it's really fascinating. I mean, it's really amazing. I tell people what they did. They decided, as it were, to put one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake. Vroom, slow down, skirt. Boom, slow down, skirt. So they had one foot on the gas, one foot on the brake. And this new date was 1975. Now, it's really interesting how these guys came up with this date. There are actually a total of 3 teachings that they were running together. All 3 of these teachings were running together. And so the witness believes that the mouth of 2 or more witnesses, every matter is established.
And these 3 teachings are very interesting because they all ran parallel and used to support each other. In fact, The first teaching was found in the book of Genesis, where the Watchtower Society taught that each creative year took 7,000 years to create. Number two, they had a teaching that in 1975, mankind's existence here on the earth would be a total of 6,000 years. And finally, teaching number three, they taught the 1914 generation, where individuals that were born prior to 1914 would actually be still alive here on the earth during the end of the world.
The first teaching was known as the teaching of how long were the creative days. How long did it take God in the book of Genesis? How long were the creative days? Well, there are many websites that you can go to right now, and they will go into explicit details. But just to sum it up real simple, Jehovah's Witnesses for many, many years taught that each creative day was 7,000 years. 7,000 years. So that was a teaching, solid teaching. Every Jehovah's Witness, every elder, every circuit overseer, at the time before they fired the district overseers, every district overseer stood on platforms all over the world. People from Bethel, governing body members, and they explained to the listening audience, each creative day was 7,000 years. Any Jehovah's Witness who said otherwise would have been removed as a person who was rejecting teachings of God. That's a fact. If any elder stood on the platform and said, well, brothers, I tell you, I'm a geologist and I study the earth and everything, and the earth is not a couple thousand years old. It's quite a few million years old, maybe even more than that. That brother would have been snatched off the platform and deleted. So this is what Jehovah's Witnesses taught. Each creative day, 7,000 years. So then we get to this date of Adam. Adam's birthday. That's all it really was. Jehovah's Witnesses were teaching that based on their chronology and their calculations, in the year 1975, Adam would have been 6,000 years old. Now, what's interesting about this is why I enjoy talking about this subject. Jehovah's Witnesses don't celebrate birthdays. You'll never see a Jehovah's Witness, you got Sister O, she's been living for 82 years, and somebody in the congregation will say, we're going to take Sister O down to Golden Corral for lunch. Y'all friends want to come along, we're going to take Sister O down. Nobody would do that. Jehovah's Witnesses don't celebrate birthdays. They don't observe birthdays. In fact, they don't even care about the day of Jesus being born, because the issue of birthdays is not something that's of any importance to Jehovah's Witnesses. But it's interesting that these two birthdays are the birthday of Adam and the birthday of Eve. Now, why? They had calculated that Adam would be 6,000 years old in 1975. Now, the question I've always asked witnesses, what is the biblical significance of Adam being 6,000 years old as opposed to 5,999 or 6,001? And this is where the problem starts, is because it is at this point that Jehovah's Witnesses now begin to introduce something to all Jehovah's Witnesses. And that is, they're introducing that the world is going to end in 1975. Now, when you talk to a Jehovah's Witness, and I was trained this way, and I train other people as well as an elder, that when someone raises this question, you always answer it in this setting. You'll find basically three types of Jehovah's Witnesses that you'll run into. My experience has been that when you talk to certain Jehovah's Witnesses who have certain positions within the organization, they'll just be up front like, Freddie France was out there in left field on that one. He was out there on that one. Society just didn't know what they were talking about, man. But it's okay, it's okay. So you have some in the organization, they won't even argue with, they won't even try to defend it. They just recognize it was just crazy. Then you meet the second type of Jehovah's Witness. He's the one who will deny. No, we never talked that. People just be trying to tell lies on us. We never said about 75 in the world coming in. That's the second kind you meet. But what you will typically meet is the third type Jehovah's Witness. And he's the one who will say something along these lines. Well, we had great expectations. We was earnestly looking for something to happen. And then they'll use this phrase. There were some brothers who they were teaching this, talking about this.
Yeah, well, you know what? It makes you wonder just who these some brothers are.
That's a good question, Lady C. Who are these some brothers? I've never been able to get a good Jehovah's Witness. I never get a good answer. Who are these some brothers? I mean, when you listen to a Jehovah's Witness talk about 1975 and they use this phrase, there were some brothers, it's always in the context of some sister down in Meridian, Mississippi, or some guy up in Vermont. You know, some non-important Jehovah's Witness, just some rank and file Jehovah's Witness came up with it. Well, we want to see exactly who were these some brothers. We want to find out who is responsible for this. Who does this issue of the world coming to an end in 1975 and them being put together, who is actually responsible for that? Well, we're going to see. We're going to take their own published material and identify who is responsible for this. Now, ladies, see, what did you find to shed some light as to who is actually responsible for this entire idea and concept of 1975?
I found some information that was buried in the 1980 yearbook. And the interesting thing about this is Jehovah's Witnesses do not place yearbooks out in field service with the general public. So most people wouldn't even get a chance to read the information contained therein. But based on a talk, Choosing the Best Way of Life, the society was recounting some of the things that the brothers were saying. And I'm going to quote this paragraph here. It says that the brothers also appreciated the candor of this same talk, which acknowledged the society's responsibility for some of the disappointment a number felt regarding 1975.
So the next time you're talking to a Jehovah's Witness and they start this some brothers routine, you stop them in their tracks and you let them know your own published material says that the society is responsible, the writing department is responsible, the governing body is responsible, the faithful and discreet slave is responsible. When you look at the definition of the word responsibility, it sums it up very well.
According to Merriam-Webster, word central, the definition for responsibility means the state of being held as the cause of something that needs to be set right. The dictionary gives an example of how this word is used, by stating that responsibility for the accident lies with the driver who was speeding.
And the synonyms of this word is blame, fault, and liability, and related words, accountability.
The Watchtower, according to the yearbook, the society says it's our responsibility for anything dealing with 1975. Because the question you have to ask is, who in the world do you know takes responsibility for something they didn't do? I don't know anybody who would go into their job, take responsibility for something they didn't do. Who does that? Nobody does that. People take responsibility because this is something that they have responsible for. They did it or failed to do it. It's interesting that there are only two denominations, two religious groups with the idea of 1975 and the world. The first group is the Worldwide Church of God under the leadership of Hubert Armstrong. He had a son named Garner Ted Armstrong. He had a TV show that used to come on years ago. And they had a little magazine that was called The Plain Truth. They was teaching that the world would end in 1975. And so were Jehovah's Witnesses. So when it came to 1975, the society tried to have a strategy, as I mentioned before. We're going to put one foot on the gas, one foot on the brake. And so as a result, some 5 years later, people were still talking about Jehovah's Witnesses in 1975. This was still being discussed in the congregation to the point that the society finally came out with another interesting article about 1975, where they made the following statement.
March 15th, 1980 Watchtower, pages 17 and 18.
Considerable expectation was aroused regarding the year 1975. There were statements made then and thereafter, stressing that this was only a possibility. Unfortunately, however, along with such cautionary information, there were other statements published that implied that such realization of hopes by that year was more of a probability than a mere possibility. It is to be regretted that these latter statements apparently overshadowed the cautionary ones and contributed to a buildup of the expectation already initiated.
So what did the society regret? Did they regret telling people that Adam was going to have a birthday in 1975? No. They regretted telling people that the world was going to end in 1975. Now, if you notice, it says that it was presented as a probability. Let me give you an example, because we're talking about culture and how words have meaning. Imagine if a person works for a manufacturing company. They have branch offices all over the United States. And it is announced that we're having an all-hands meeting tomorrow. And the president and CEO will be flying in from New York City. He will be flanked by his attorneys, corporate attorneys, along with his chief financial officer and the director of human resources. Now, this particular plant, it runs. People work on their lines. Equipment is running constantly. And everybody's informed that everything will be shut down for this all-hands meeting. Now, at this point, people know this is going to be a serious meeting. Now, we ain't never shut this plant down, but we're going to shut it down today because there's an all-hands meeting. And then all of a sudden, the president starts speaking. And the president is talking about how difficult their industry is right now and all the challenges this industry is facing. And then he begins to make the following statements. He says something along these lines. He says, for many, many years, we have always had employees who have recommended family and friends for employment here at the company. Well, as of tomorrow, there is a complete hiring freeze throughout the entire company. And then he makes the following statement. He says, and this plant will probably be closed. Now, did he say that the plant was going to be closed? No, he didn't say the plant was going to be closed. But he said the plant will probably be closed. Now, for everyone who is standing in that warehouse listening to this upper senior leadership make these statements, and they see who he is surrounded by. He is surrounded by all of the corporate head honchos. Do they think he's joking? Or do they take this man serious in terms of, you will probably see this plant closed? When each person walks out of that warehouse and they go to get their cell phone, what do you think they're going to tell their spouse? Do you think they're going to tell their spouse, we good to go, we ain't got nothing to worry about, we good to go? No. They're going to tell their spouse things that will involve them having to make behavioral changes. They're going to be looking at, maybe we need to cut back on some things, baby. It's not looking good. It's not looking good. That's what they'll be saying. Now, the man didn't say that he was going to close the plant. That was never stated. And that's what Jehovah will say. Well, show me where it says in the Watchtower, the world will end in 1975. I tell people the way the Watchtower approached this was exactly the same way they approached higher education. There is absolutely nowhere in any print will you find the statement, thou shalt not go to college. But the culture, the articles that they wrote on higher education, every young person understood what they were trying to tell them. And for that reason, Jehovah's Witnesses rank at the very bottom of having members who have higher education, because they created a culture where Jehovah's Witnesses knew going to college had no value. Yet you will not find anywhere in print where it says, thou shalt not go. And the same with 1975. When the president and even the Watchtower acknowledges that they presented it, foot on the gas, foot on the brake. And as a result, people, just like on a job where a senior official would tell you that this plant will probably close, people would leave the job that day and they would make changes in their lives because they realize what they are actually facing. Same with Jehovah's Witnesses. They made changes in their life. Now, when they were told that there was a hiring freeze, this company has a hiring freeze worldwide, the average person who would hear that would understand this is very serious. Well, that's something that simply happened to Jehovah's Witnesses. This is what happened with Jehovah's Witnesses. It was announced that worldwide Bible studies would only be held for 6 months. Jehovah's Witnesses had been studying with people for a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years before they got baptized. Then the Watchtower came out and told all Jehovah's Witnesses at the conventions, the follow-up with Kingdom Ministries, that we are only going to study with people for 6 months. If people do not get baptized in 6 months, making progress, we move on.
And move on is what Jehovah's Witnesses were told to do. In fact, at the district convention, the new arrangement of the 6-month Bible study program was introduced. And this information was followed up with the 1968 Kingdom Ministry, which gave the details of this new Bible study program. And finally, in 1969, they published an article, Have You Been Studying for 6 Months? In the May 15th, 1969 Watchtower. And this article, this information, was directed at Bible studies. Now, we want you to read these references that we've put in the podcast description, because you really need to get the real flavor of the culture that the Jehovah's Witnesses and their Bible studies were being groomed to accept this date of 1975. Because remember, the Watchtower Society during that time, prior to 1975, had a great influx of people getting baptized. So it was not just Jehovah's Witnesses that were currently in the organization, but it was also individuals that were becoming Jehovah's Witnesses, all because of the information that they were actually reading about in the Watchtower. So this was a very, very important time period for a lot of people. And so, get a chance to read those references so that you can get the full picture of what was actually taking place at that time.
And so if you're sitting there hearing that you will now have to drop all of your Bible studies because they've been studying for a year or two, especially pioneers. Pioneers love Bible studies because they can kill time. Imagine if you got 5 Bible studies and you go there an hour and a half every week. You got plenty of time in the wintertime. All of a sudden, the circus is telling you, you got to drop them studies because they're not making no progress. Now, for the average Jehovah's Witness who was sitting there and heard that, they would realize the slave is serious. We had a district overseer, his name was J.C. Howard. He always used to use this phrase. He would say things like, friends, the society can't just say everything they want to say in the magazine, so we have to have discernment, perception, and spiritual understanding of which way is the slave leaning. Which way is the slave leaning is what J.C. Howard, who was our district overseer years ago, used to always say. So when you hear this, and when you combine this with the culture, and what is the culture? Let me give you another example. When I was growing up, Jehovah's Witnesses referred to this scripture all the time. In the book of Amos, notice what it says.
The prophet Amos declared, "The sovereign Lord Jehovah will not do a thing unless he has revealed his confidential matter to his servants, the prophets." Amos 3:7.
So, as a Jehovah's Witness, you were taught that before Jehovah is going to make a major move, he's going to let his servants know. Well, what is the channel that Jehovah is working through? It's through the Watchtower, the faithful and discreet slave. And so they're standing there telling you that time is short. In fact, this whole idea of time being short, let me give you a couple examples of how the culture of Jehovah's Witnesses is. The Jehovah's Witnesses were told a few months.
According to the September 15th, 1941 Watchtower, the society recounted how exciting it was when they released this new book, Children. Receiving the gift, book Children, the marching children clasped it to them. Not a toy or plaything for idle pleasure, but the Lord's provided instrument for most effective work in the remaining months before Armageddon.
Few remaining years.
It has come within the generation that has already seen 2 world wars, and it is only a few short years ahead of us. April 15th, 1967, Watchtower.
Who do you think sat at any district convention, circuit assembly, and concluded when someone from Bethel said, brothers, there are only a few remaining months, only a few remaining years? What Jehovah's Witness do you think in his right mind said to himself, they talk about 38, 45 years probably. That's not what they thought. It's often said that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And whenever you see somebody in there in a business meeting or something and they pull out graphs and charts and diagrams and all this, people pay a little attention to it. They figure this guy put some work into this, so he must know what he's talking about. Well, the Watchtower understands the value of pictures as well. In fact, that's why they have this department. It's called the art department or the graphics department, where they will put pictures with articles. And that's what they did when it came to 1975. I'm going to show you a chart that the society used when they was trying to teach people about 1975. Take a look at this chart. So what do we see on this chart? What you're looking at is a chart that the art department put together for the society's writing department. They wanted to stress how important 1975 was to Jehovah's Witnesses. And what do you see? We see what could be referred to as the most monumental dates of Jehovah's Witnesses according to their theology. We see the date of man's creation. We see the date of the flood. We see the date that Israel fled from Egypt. We see the fall of Jerusalem. We see the baptism of Jesus Christ. We see 1914, the establishment of God's kingdom. Now, keep in mind, all of these dates now, these dates represent what? They represent the most important dates in the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses. And last but not least, what date do we see? We see 1975. Now think about this now. You have just looked at all of the major dates in the theological teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses. And now we're down to 1975, which will be the birthday of Adam. Now, I want you to think about that. Look at this chart. These are the major dates of Jehovah's Witnesses teaching. And at the end of all of these major dates, we're looking at the birthday of Adam. Do you really believe that was what Jehovah's Witnesses were to walk away with after looking at this chart? Of course not. The purpose was to highlight that 1975 has significant meaning. We're talking about the end of the world, because that's the only thing that would make it valid to be on the chart to start with. Not because Adam had a birthday, but this is how Jehovah's Witnesses were taught over and over, the types of things to view, how to look at things. Lady C read an interesting article in the May 15, 1980 Watchtower. Well, the society acknowledged that they were responsible for this buildup surrounding 1975, as well as being responsible for initiating it. Now, how did this buildup continue to take place? Well, it was on many different fronts. For example, they had an article entitled, "Why Are You Looking Forward to 1975?" Now, be honest and ask yourself this serious, critical thinking question. What door did any Jehovah's Witness knock on of a person who was unfamiliar with Jehovah's Witnesses and asked that question, why are you looking forward to 1975? And they expected the householder to tell them why they were looking forward to 1975. If anything, the average householder would probably say, I didn't even know I was supposed to be looking forward to 1975. Because nobody had ever heard of the world ending in 1975. Now, it's interesting how the society took this and began to build on it by telling people at conventions, assemblies, Bible studies, this is what happened. And the results are in the facts of the numbers. The numbers speak for themselves. Jehovah's Witnesses experienced some of the most explosive growth during this time leading up to 1975. Do you really think that people were telling their Bible studies, well, Adam's going to have a birthday? That's what is so special about 1975. You see, the Watchtower put all of their major biblical dates on a chart, and then they put 1975. And to give importance to 1975, this is what they had to do. Just merely telling people Adam's going to be 6,000 years old, that has no importance at all. Can you imagine a parent who asks his children, where do you want to go for vacation? And all the children say, we want to go to Disney. And then the parent says, well, we might go, we might not. But yet, the parent engages in a buildup with these children. Every day the children come home from school, they see a brochure from Orlando, Florida. They come home the next day, they see brochures about Mickey and Minnie. Now, what do you think these children are starting to think? And then they ask their parents, and they'll say, well, we're not saying, we might not. So over a period of time, these children build up this expectation that their parents are going to take them to Disney. They trust their parents. They don't think their parents would mislead them. But yet, what happens on the day they're supposed to go on vacation? The parents say, we never told you we were taking you to Disney. How do you think those children would feel? And so in the Jehovah's Witness denomination, you often have people who are sick, people who have physical ailments, arms, legs missing, in wheelchairs. They can't see. They're struggling financially. They live in countries where they're under dictators. So these are a group of people who are in pain, looking for relief. And along comes the Watchtower and says, it's going to be real soon, real soon. Look at this chart. Look at this graph. Everything is pointing right to 1975. And all these other dates, what do you think is going to happen in 75? And so this culture that is built up, this expectation is built up. I tell people all the time, the society was very brilliant in how they approached 1975. In the other predictions, they just came straight out and said it. But with this one, they decided to put one foot on the brake and one foot on the gas. But yet, at the end of the day, the society is responsible for 1975. What is so interesting about 1975 is that when you talk to a Jehovah's, they'll say, well, that's what some of the brothers say, that's what former Jehovah's Witnesses say. Actually, it's interesting what people who are not Jehovah's Witnesses had to say. They were news reporters for various newspapers. And when they went to the convention and they met with the representative who works in what's called news service, the Jehovah's Witness who works in news service has the responsibility of telling the news media, the press, what the convention is about, how many attended, how many were baptized, and any points of interest. And if you look at these articles that these newspapers reported of what was of interest, it revolves around the world ending in 1975. To accuse these news editors of having an axe to grind is dishonest. These people merely went back to their paper and reported the conversation and the discussion they had had with the Watchtower representatives. Can you imagine these guys sitting around the table discussing, do y'all really want to run with this? This group is predicting the world's going to end in 75? Yep, that's what he told me. That's what we discussed. And yet, here we are years later, and Jehovah's Witnesses are still trying to portray this teaching of theirs that the world will end in 1975 as if it was just some brothers, when in fact it came down from the highest levels of their religious denomination. Their governing body, their faithful and discreet slave, has already acknowledged that they are the ones who are responsible for 1975. So never let a Jehovah's Witness try to portray it any other way than what it actually is. This idea of the world ending and taking place in the year 1975, that comes from the highest levels of the Jehovah's Witness denomination. It's just that simple. And the third parallel teaching, of course, was a generation of 1914 that was not supposed to die out before Armageddon started. Now, what has become of these three teachings? All three of these teachings, the teaching that each creative day was 7,000 years, has been trashed, discarded. It was dead on arrival. Jehovah's Witnesses no longer teach that. The generation of 1914 that would not die off before Armageddon came, what has become of that teaching? It's been trashed, discarded. It was dead on arrival. And what about mankind's existence for 6,000 years, Adam's birthday? If you talk to a Jehovah's Witness today, you will find that that date of 1975 has absolutely no biblical significance whatsoever. And yet, during that time, Jehovah's Witnesses experienced the most explosive growth as a denomination.
Well, this has been Lady C.
This has been JT.
And we want to thank you all for tuning in to another episode of The Critical Thought.
All right. Take care.
This program was sponsored by Critical Thinkers.